Good evening to you, Duma. Somewhat ironic that the President is talking about working together when even the people and the stakeholders who were party to the weekend lekgotla are going to be out on the streets tomorrow, and even his ministers cannot agree on things such as SAA. What hopes do you have for an agreement, an economic recovery plan that everyone will sign on to?
Sally, I'm actually very puzzled. It's heading for 7 months after the lockdown started. And there was a summit, a special session chaired by the President at NEDLAC on the 13th of August to discuss this economic recovery plan. And then they put together a group to develop this plan, which was released on the 15th of September. Now, it is almost a month later. We thought that government has something to add to this plan. So it seems like after so long of so much discussion, there is actually nothing that the government has in its locker. So now they were talking about two things. They were talking about an infrastructure-led recovery. So if you look at the plan that's on the table, it doesn't deal with the immediate humanitarian crisis facing our country. 2.2 million people unemployed. The number of unemployed South Africans is about 13 million people. So we have to develop a humanitarian response to this crisis. So that is lacking in the plan that you see at NEDLAC. It doesn't put consumption in terms of the households in South Africa. There's no injection of new money into the economy. Now, on the infrastructure plan, you must remember that there have been two plans. So there was a plan in 2018 September, where the President said that he's going to set up a 400 billion rand infrastructure fund. This is 2 years before this crisis. Now, on Monday, 2 days ago, the Development Bank, which is leading the fund, the infrastructure fund, appointed someone to head this fund 2 years later. And in that 2 years, there is no allocation from the Treasury towards this infrastructure fund, so we don't have an infrastructure fund. The second thing, if you look at the budget over the last few years, the government is talking about public-private partnerships. The public-private partnerships are the smallest component of public sector infrastructure spend. They account for about 2% over the past 20 years of infrastructure spend. So it's not even worth looking at. So these are things that they were supposed to do over the last 20 years, which haven't succeeded, public-private partnerships. The third thing I want to say is that the biggest reason for the collapse of investment pre-COVID has been a public sector investment strike. Public sector investment by general government and state-owned companies has collapsed by 22% over the 5 years before COVID crisis. So the plan that's on the table by the government doesn't say how they're going to reverse this collapse of public sector investment. So until the ANC or the government can explain how they're going to finance this infrastructure-led recovery, I think South Africans, they've been waiting for too long for this plan, and there are still no details on the financing of this plan.
What do you think the delay is at the moment? I mean, you've mentioned so many concerns and so many problems. Do you think it's simply that there isn't a coherent plan that everyone's prepared to sign on to?
Yes, there isn't a plan. Well, the Labour side, all the stakeholders agreed to what is on the table currently. But what we thought is going to happen is that the government has to go back to their offices, and they have to come up with something in addition to what was proposed. That's what I thought was going to happen. And there was talk of an employment plan that's going to use 19.6 billion rands that hadn't been allocated in the budget. So we haven't seen details of that as well. But it's really, I don't understand why it has taken so long to come up with a recovery plan for the economy.
Do you think it is in part because there isn't solid agreement, even amongst cabinet ministers, on things like SAA, that cabinet ministers disagree on whether it should be saved or whether it should be folded? What is your view?
Okay, yeah, that's one of the reasons. There's disagreement. So I think we mustn't paper around the real disagreement that is in society. The Labour, the community constituencies at NEDLAC do not agree with the macroeconomic policy that the government has put in place. So that is why, part of the reason why they're marching tomorrow. And as well, so within government, so the government has announced an unprecedented 600 billion rands of cuts to government spending in the midst of a depression. So these are the cuts that have been announced in the February budget and the supplementary budget. And if you add them all together, it is 600 billion rands of austerity measures that the government has announced. So a lot of the stakeholders do not agree with that, and many economists, myself included, do not agree with this cuts in government spending, because how can you finance public sector infrastructure recovery plan if you as government are cutting expenditure? It doesn't make sense.
If you were the president and you had carte blanche to make one or two key decisions, what would you do to start stimulating the economy immediately? Would you drop the interest rate? Would you introduce a basic income grant? Because at the rate we're going, we have such high unemployment, no one's going to have any money to spend and stimulate our economy.
Yes, you've hit the nail on the head. Now, the unemployment numbers, 2.2 million people fell off the statistical radar, as the president said. But despite that we haven't counted these people as unemployed, the unemployment rate for black African females is 50%, 52%, I think. The unemployment rate in the Eastern Cape is more than 50%. Now, if you add those people, unemployed people, back onto the statistical radar, we're heading towards 50% unemployment. Now, once you have 50% unemployment, the whole society becomes unviable. And it will take too long for us to create 13 million jobs for the unemployed. So as you say, we have no option but to implement a basic income grant for it's about 33 million South Africans who are between the ages of 18 and 59, and most civil society organizations believe that it should be at the upper bound poverty level. So that would cost about 500 billion rands a year, and that's the half of the stimulus that is required and that civil society is talking about, and the other half can be dedicated to infrastructure. But you have to balance addressing the immediate humanitarian crisis through a basic income grant and the medium and long-term issues relating to infrastructure. But you can't have an infrastructure plan without a financing plan as to how you're going to finance the infrastructure.
Well, thank you very much for your time this evening. Duma Gqubule, economist and director of the Centre for Economic Development and Transformation.